Is North Korea playing games with the Winter Olympics? Athletes from both Koreas are set to march under a unified flag at the opening ceremony. But as the South rolls out the red carpet, the North's armed forces were paraded in Pyeongchang. So can the honeymoon last? This is Inside Story. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. This is Inside Story. South Korea's president has been trying to sell the Winter Games in Pyeongchang as the Peace Olympics. He may have got his wish with an unexpected thaw with the North. The two Koreas decided to talk at the height of tension over the North's nuclear bomb and ballistic missile development. The first face-to-face negotiations in 2 years led to the North's inclusion in the Winter Games. And now Pyongyang is on the charm offensive. Athletes and cheerleaders from the North are at the Games, ready to march with competitors from the South under a unified flag. The delegation from north of the border is being led by the ceremonial head of the state, Kim Jong. He is the highest-level leader ever to visit South Korea. Also there is the sister of leader Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong is said to be increasingly powerful and influential. But the U.S. isn't sold. Vice President Mike Pence has been speaking in Tokyo before leading the U.S. delegation to South Korea. He warned the world not to get taken in by the North.
The United States and Japan will continue to confront the most dangerous threat in the Indo-Pacific, the rogue regime in North Korea. We will not allow North Korean propaganda to hijack the message and imagery of the Olympic Games. We will not allow North Korea to hide behind the Olympic banner the reality that they enslave their people and threaten the wider region.
And on the eve of the much-anticipated display of unity at the Winter Olympics, a show force in Pyongyang, a military parade for the 70th anniversary of the founding of North Korea's army. Kim Jong-un warned that soldiers are ready to fight if the US and its allies threaten its sovereignty. Included in the convoy of weapons were intercontinental ballistic missiles, the focus of global alarm, frustration and condemnation. 2017 was a busy year for North Korea's missile and nuclear scientists. More than 20 missiles were test-launched last year, suggesting developments in both short and long-range rocket technology. A new missile blasted off in November, larger and more powerful than any launched from the North before and capable, analysts say, of attacking any city in the United States. But the achievements came at a cost to the already poverty-stricken economy, with tough new sanctions imposed by the US and UN. Let's bring in our guests. By Skype from Beijing is Xiaohe Chang, Associate Professor in the Department of International Politics at Renmin University of China. From Seoul is Se-Woong, publisher of Korea Expose. And by Skype from Bedminster, New Jersey, is Chang, a U.S. foreign policy analyst. Thank you all for joining us. Let me start by asking Mr. Koo this. This is a moment when everyone is talking about the potential for the North and South to come together, set aside their differences. But then we have this military parade in the North. What is Kim Jong-un trying to say by this parade?
Well, I think one thing we need to point out is that this was not, in fact, the kind of occasion many people expected it to be. I think we can say with confidence that the scale of the parade was not as grand as some had anticipated. And also the kind of publicity North Korea wanted to generate for it was clearly limited. There was no live broadcast of the parade. It was only made available later on state television. And also there were no foreign correspondents invited to observe the event, which was quite interesting given that the eyes of the world were on Pyongyang today. So the statement Pyongyang is trying to send is obviously that they are willing to make some kind of concession given everything that has been happening. If we want to recap, we have seen this very interesting and exciting month of engagement between the two Koreas. And I think we can say with certainty that the Moon administration here in Seoul has tried very hard to accommodate North Korea to the best of its abilities. And of course, despite the fact that North Korea has been very adamant that it was going to have this parade, it was not going to change the date. What has happened today actually shows it is mindful of what has been, what the South Korean government has been trying to do, and they're willing to make certain concessions.
Mr. Chang, is this a message of defiance, or is just an opportunity by North Korea to display its military might?
Well, what North Korea was trying to do was to intimidate the South. We got to remember that within living memory, the North Koreans have not had a parade during the winter. You know, this parade, which is meant to mark the foundation, the establishment of the North Korean Army, the Korean People's Army, normally occurs in April. This is unprecedented. So what they're doing on the eve of the Olympics is saying to the South Koreans, we're going to subjugate you. You know, we're talking about details that made it look better. No, this was a real attempt, I think, to show hostility and belligerence. And that's the nature of the North Korean regime, the most militaristic on earth. People in South Korea may want to sugarcoat it, but unfortunately, that is what the North Koreans were trying to say.
Okay, let's go to our guest in Beijing, Mr. Xiaohe Chang. Mr. Chang, is this an opportunity by the North Korean government to try to show the world it is capable of one of the most powerful arsenals in modern times, or do you just find it an opportunity for them to say, you know what, we're here?
Yes, I think so, sir. You see, on the one hand, North Korea have tried to flex its muscles and send a strong message to the outside world that North Korea will continue to pursue its nuclear and missile programs, and if necessary, North Korea will confront external threat. That's the message North Korea tried to send to the outside world. But on the other hand, I'd like to say is holding a military parade on the eve certainly was counterproductive, but it was not a big deal in comparison with what we have witnessed in past years. North Korea has conducted numerous missile tests and nuclear tests. So North Korea it's not big deal. And also we witnessed that North Korea is doing some things, trying to minimize its military parade's impact on the ongoing upcoming Olympic Games. For example, the North Korea does not invite foreign journalists to attend military parade. And also the size of military parade was limited.
Mr. Koo, so this is happening against the backdrop of the Winter Olympics. Do you think that the Games could be this time genuine opportunity or a platform for both North and South to set aside their differences?
Well, it's certainly what the South Korean government would like to see. There's a reason why the government wanted to reduce tensions here, because they feel that this is a very important precondition for dialogue. It's not possible that there can be any negotiation while Pyongyang and Washington both engage in threats and belligerence. So now it seems as though the climate is coming into place and there is potential. But of course, the government is moving very carefully to make sure that other pieces fall into their places. For example, I think what we have seen from Pyongyang so far is that despite its commitment to showing this kind of force and maintaining its hostile gesture, it is willing to engage in at least some form of change. And what is going to be very important for South Korea is that it needs to put enough persuasion into play so that Washington might also reciprocate in return. And that is going to be the very difficult part for the government, given what we have heard from key members of the Trump administration so far.
Mr. Chang, the North Korean delegation is led by senior members, including the sister of Kim Jong who is playing increasing roles now in North Korea. Is there any message that the North Koreans are trying to send by the level of their own delegation?
Well, yeah, this is interesting because President Trump announced that his daughter, Ivanka, would attend the closing ceremonies. So the North Koreans one up that by sending the sister of Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong. And this is important because this is the first immediate family member of the Kim family to set foot in South Korea. So this is going to be an important game of chess, and we're seeing this across the board. Vice President Pence came in and said that not going to allow the North Koreans to hijack the Olympics. So there is this geopolitical competition going on during what the South Koreans call the Peace Olympics. This is absolutely fascinating.
So, Chang, the level of the delegation, the senior members from North Korea attending the games, do you find it as an overture towards the South Koreans, or just an attempt by North Korea to test waters and see how things are going to move forward in the near future?
It's very important to witness who will come to attend opening ceremony from North Korea. Certainly, it's Kim Jong and the chairman of National People's Congress will attend, and also the top leader of North Korea's young sisters will come to attend. That sends a very strong signal that North Korea is serious about improving its relationship with South Koreans. That's the one thing we have to keep in mind. But on the other hand, we have to get into the issues whether or not the two Koreans could discuss North Korea's nuclear issues and the missile issues, in addition to all the symbolic issues like the cheering, the scores, and art performance. That's all carries very symbolic meanings. But the most important thing is whether or not the two countries will touch the North Korea's nuclear issues and promote the discussions between North Korea and the United States.
Mr. Koo, the South Korean President Moon Jae-in said he is committed to pursue the reconciliation with North Korea. Now, when it comes to reconciliation, what do you think is the top priority? Nuclear issue, de-escalation?
Well, I mean, de-escalation is obviously important, but the government has made it very clear that in pursuing de-escalation, their ultimate goal is denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. I don't think anybody can question that. What is, however, being questioned is the method the government is using to arrive at that goal. So I think there's a lot of doubt, I think, in the international circle as to whether this particular policy is going to work, whether sending out such a warm welcome for the North Korean delegation, accommodating these high-ranking members of Pyongyang's elite circle, not to mention that today there were reports President Moon might in fact even meet with Kim Jong-un's sister. So that's a lot of welcome being shown, but in return, what can the government actually expect? As your guest in China has just said, I think the important thing is to bring the discussion back to the issue of what to do with North Korea's nuclear program, and that is not entirely clear at the moment. I think what the government has already hinted at is they think it is very important to bring Pyongyang and Washington together to talk to each other directly. And unfortunately, given the kind of messages we have seen from, for example, Vice President Mike Pence, it seems that the U.S. side is not especially interested in this possibility, despite the fact that President Trump has actually come out saying that dialogue may not be a bad thing and something good might come out of the Olympics, and he's willing to wait and see what happens.
China is North Korea's main ally. The Chinese foreign minister says negotiations are the only way to break what he called the vicious cycle on the peninsula.
We cannot merely rely on the efforts of the South and the North. All the parties should make joint efforts. We won't be able to make our goal if some are trying to open the door while others are trying to close it. We hope that all the parties can continue to follow the resolutions of the UN Security Council and suspend all actions that may intensify the conflict, and to do their best to maintain the peace and stability of the peninsula.
Mr. Chang, there are two options here. First, military confrontation. Everyone knows the massive cost of that confrontation if it happens. Then there is the second option, which is political talks. Everyone knows that the Chinese government has huge leverage over North Korea. Do you think this is a path the Americans should pursue in the near future?
Well, the United States should try to talk to North Korea, but only when North Korea understands it has no choice but to disarm. Talking to North Korea before then is unproductive, as we've seen in the various negotiations with the North covering 3 decades. They'll just use the time to perfect their arsenal. And the Chinese are going to help the North Koreans with not only technology, but also financing, all the rest of it. The United States has a strong policy, and that is to cut off money flows to the North Koreans so they can't launch missiles, so they can't detonate nukes, so that Kim Jong can't engage in gift politics. And that's the way to do it, because when the North Koreans understand they have no choice but to disarm, that's when you talk to them.
But this
and that's American policy.
Yeah, Mr. Chang, this doesn't seem to be paying off, because when you look at the string of tests that were conducted by the North Koreans over the last year, you can see that they are moving forward towards establishing very strong intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Well, there are signs from North Korea that the sanctions are having an effect. So, for instance, some officials in Pyongyang are not getting their rations through their special distribution channels, all the rest of it. But, the point, I think, is that the United States has not been vigorous enough in enforcing sanctions. So, for instance, we should be going after Chinese banks that have been laundering money for the North Koreans. We should be imposing costs on China for violating UN sanctions as recently as the last several months. Unless we do these things, there won't be a peaceful solution. So what we have to do, I think, is to be even more strict in enforcing sanctions, not only against the North Koreans, but also against their big power sponsors, the Chinese and the Russians, as well as others that have been supporting the North Korean economy.
Let's go to our guest in Beijing. Xiaohe Cheng, why the Chinese are not doing enough to put pressure on the North Korean to stop their nuclear or to abandon their nuclear program?
I think China has done enough to pressure North Korea to abandon its nuclear and the missile programs. Since 2006, Chinese government has endorsed 11 United Nations Security Council's resolutions. China has been the leading trade partner to North Korea in order to sanction that countries, in order to punish that country's wrongdoings. And China made huge sacrifice to reduce its trade with that countries. And when China endorsed United Nations Security Council to adopt economic sanctions against the North Korea, China would be the first outside country to fall the victims of such kind of sanctions. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, so China was and still is a leading trade partner to that country. Economic sanctions hurt North Korea, but also hurt China. But China willing to make such a sacrifice, and will continue to do so.
Mr. Koo, when you see the Chinese, the North and South Korean athletes walking under the same white and blue flag, you would assume that in an ideal world, North and South can come together and then solve their problems. But from the conversation now, it looks like we need more regional powers to step in. Do you think that if the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans can come together, that could be conducive to any permanent solution?
Well, this is the reality that many South Koreans recognize, that this may have become a very prosperous country, but it is a country that does not necessarily have the political power on the global stage to match that, which is why the government also sees that it needs to work with these partners in the region, whether it be China, Russia, Japan, and of course the United States, to have some kind of solution that everybody can agree on. But as the exchanges now between your guests in the US and in China have revealed, I think there is not as much consensus as South Koreans would like to see. Mr. Chang, I believe, in the US has made a good point that despite all that has been said, China, in fact, does not seem to be living up to its part in enforcing these sanctions as North Korea. And I say that because this is the widespread feeling here in South Korea. Many people here are unhappy about the kind of role that Beijing has played in allowing North Korea to get away with these sanctions. For example, the very damning reports that surfaced recently regarding the transfer of oil from ship to ship. So those kind of things really make people here question whether there can ever be consensus that really forces North Korea to accept that it is an isolated player on a very large global stage.
Mr. Chang, I mean, many say that from a North Korean perspective, the problem is that the Americans have not been giving them enough incentives because, you know, for many decades, the North Koreans have been sticking to 2 points. First, they wanted to pursue bilateral talks with the Americans. Two, they wanted the peace treaty of 1953 to be replaced. Do you think that the two incentives could break the ice?
Well, I think what could break the ice are initial discussions during the Olympics, because you do have Kim Jong, the sister of Kim Jong-un. She perhaps is the only person that Kim listens to. And you have Vice President Pence, who has not ruled out conversations with the North Koreans. And obviously, they're going to be small steps, but there are irreconcilable differences here because North Korea has a position going back to its founding in 1948 that it is a legitimate government for all of Korea. And the Korean War was an attempt to impose a solution by force. And North Korea, since that time, has been willing to use force to kill South Koreans, kill Americans, to achieve that goal. So there's a big gap here, and it is, in a sense, irreconcilable. But, you know, these conversations that could occur during the Olympics, arranged by President Moon, could certainly help.
Mr. Xiaohe, from a Chinese perspective, what's wrong with having the two Koreas come together and unite? Does it pose any strategic risk for China?
I think as it sees, there's a number of countries are divided. China is one of the countries, and South Korea and North Korea are one of the countries. And I think that for China, it's no reason for this country to prevent the two Koreans from pursuing unified statehood. And it's morally wrong, and practically China cannot stand the ways. And also, if China promote the Korean national unifications, it serves China's national interests. China could pursue its own national unity with Taiwan.
Mr. Koo, I mean, there is the opposition in South Korea, which is opposed to any rapprochement with North Korea, but also there's a general sentiment among people which does not seem to be, at this particular moment, in favor of strong ties with North Korea. Is this something that could put more pressure on the president to pursue his agenda?
That's a very good question, in fact, because even as Mr. Moon has been pursuing this policy of rapprochement, what we have seen here in South Korea is that he's dealing with a very divided domestic electorate. Not everybody is happy about what he's doing. Although he came from a very strong place, politically speaking, because he replaced a very unpopular president here just last year. His approval rating certainly has dropped significantly, about 10 points over a 4-week period. And I think some of you or some of the other guests might have seen that, in fact, there have been limited protests going on at the Olympic site against the presence and participation of North Koreans in the Olympics. You have to understand that Koreans are ideologically divided. It often comes down to 50-50 over any kind of issue. And North Korea is an issue that really generates a very strong emotional reaction here. And in fact, there are people, I would say, who are afraid that what North Korea is doing at the moment, pursuing reconciliation and dialogue, may simply be a kind of precursor to more serious and frightening form of aggression.
Unfortunately, we'll have to leave
that this, in fact, might be a way for North Korea to try and gain more leverage.
Thank you, Mr. Se-Woong Koo, Mr. Cheng, and Mr. Gordon Chang. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution to the show. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the whole team here. Bye for now.